Dawn breaks over the Salian summer of 1943, somewhere behind the Panzers. A low boxy silhouette halts in a wheat field and drops its spade into the earth. 6 men work fast. Bridge open, charge back, elevation set, while the engine ticks in the heat like a nervous heartbeat. Then the world lurches. A 150mm shell leaves the barrel with a deep, punishing crack, and the air seems to fold around the blast. This is not a tank. It is artillery that learned to keep up. The Hummel did not appear because German engineers suddenly fell in love with heavy howitzers on tracks. It appeared because the war made the old way of doing artillery feel slow, fragile, and at the worst moments, fatal. When Germany invaded the Soviet Union in June of 1941, Panzer divisions advanced at a pace that told artillery struggled to match. Even when horse teams or trucks could haul guns forward, they often could not keep them there. Muddy seasons, broken bridges, fuel shortages, and sheer distance punished anything that relied on roads. At the same time, the Red Army's deep defenses and mass artillery meant that German armor increasingly needed immediate, concentrated fire support. Shells delivered not in hours, but in minutes. By 1942, the Wehrmacht had already fielded improvised or stopgap self-propelled artillery solutions. But what the Panzer Force wanted was something standardized. A heavy howitzer that could march with tanks, deploy quickly, fire, and relocate before counter-battery fire. This requirement was not abstract. German doctrine had long treated artillery as the arm that makes movement possible, breaking up strong points, suppressing anti-tank belts, and isolating sections of a defense so armor and infantry could roll through. But in the Soviet Union, the tempo and the geography exposed the weaknesses of dragging heavy guns behind. The solution was self-propelled artillery, integrated directly into panzer divisions, an armored artillery battalion that could move when the tanks move and that could survive the same battlefield threats long enough to do its job. The early design thinking followed a simple logic. Mount an existing field howitzer on an existing tank chassis. One explored idea was putting a 10.5cm light field howitzer on a Panzer chassis, but the program quickly gravitated towards something heavier, because the targets were heavier. The weapon that made sense on paper was the 15cm heavy field howitzer, SFH-18, the German Army's standard heavy field howitzer family. Putting that kind of punch behind the Panzer spearheads promised something German armor formations often lacked. By mid-war, a reliable way to demolish dug-in positions and strong points without calling for divisional or corps artillery to catch up. Development reports documented this shift. Light concepts were considered, but the final choice was a more powerful one. 5cm howitzer on a specialized carrier, purpose-built within the realities of German wartime production. This often meant being assembled from what already works. The chassis chosen was the Geschosswagen 3/4, a hybrid designed to use proven components from both the Panzer III and Panzer IV families. That was not aesthetic indecision, it was industrial pragmatism. Germany's armored vehicle production was a balancing act between competing priorities: tanks, assault guns, tank destroyers, and a dozen specialized vehicles. Factories faced bombing, material shortages, and constant changes in requirements. A mixed component chassis promised quicker development and easier supply because mechanics and depots already understood the systems. Crucially, the layout was reworked to fit the mission. Instead of a rear engine tank with a turret, the gun carrier moved the engine forward into the center of the hull, creating space for a large, open-top fighting compartment at the rear where the howitzer could be mounted and served. Tanks in Encyclopedia notes this as a defining change. The engine relocation was specifically to make room for the gun and its crew in an armored compartment at the back. That single choice, engine in the middle, gun in the rear, signals what the Hummer was meant to be. Not an all-purpose brawler, but a mobile artillery platform optimized for indirect fire, crew workflow, and rapid emplacement. Design work was associated with Alcat, a major German armored vehicle designer and producer, while assembly was contracted to Deutsche Eisenwerke at Duisburg. This reflected the way Germany distributed production across firms and sites to push output under wartime pressure. Tanks, Encyclopedia's overview, explicitly links the contract to Alcat and notes Deutsche Eisenwerke in Duisburg as the assembly firm. This division of labor mattered. Specialized design shops could refine layouts and fixtures, while heavy industry firms with the capacity for large assemblies could turn drawings into vehicles. It also meant the Hummel was born into the same ecosystem as Germany's other expedient solutions. Machines built to fill a tactical gap fast, even if they were never perfect. The chassis itself had another advantage. It could serve multiple programs. The same basic carrier concept underpinned the Nashorn, a Hornets tank destroyer, which mounted an 8.8 cm anti-tank gun in a similar open-top arrangement. That mattered politically and industrially. If a chassis could support more than one high-priority weapon system, it was easier to justify the disruption and tooling. By early 1943, the Hummel was no longer just an answer on paper. The first production vehicles were completed in February and entered service in March, and they were rushed to the Eastern Front, where German Panzer divisions were preparing for the enormous summer battles that would culminate around Kursk. Tanks in Encyclopedia gives a crisp timeline. The first small production series completed in February 1943, entering service the following month. The timing is telling. Germany was trying to regain initiative after Stalingrad. If armored operations were going to succeed, they needed artillery that could keep pace, especially heavy artillery capable of smashing prepared defenses. The Hummel's arrival also fit into a broader reorganization of Panzer division artillery. In practice, Hummels were paired with lighter Vespa self-propelled guns in armored artillery battalions. Vespa for volume and flexibility, Hummel for heavier, deeper punch. Even when German units lacked fuel, replacement crews, or enough tanks, they still craved artillery that could move across broken ground and deploy without waiting for horse teams or road trains. The Hummel was a direct response to that operational hunger. The Germans gave it the nickname Hummel, bumblebee, a small creature with an unpleasant sting. Officially, its designation was SDKFZ-165, and its full descriptive title connected it to the 1.5 cm field howitzer and the hybrid gun carrier chassis. But the regime's leadership could be oddly sensitive about names. On the 27th of February 1944, Adolf Hitler ordered the name Hummel dropped because he considered it inappropriate for a fighting vehicle. In other words, the army could build a brutal, open-top artillery machine to keep pace with armored breakthroughs, but the Supreme Commander wanted it to stop being called a bumblebee. In production terms, the Hummel was significant, but not dominant. Sources vary slightly on exact totals, but they cluster around roughly 700 vehicles produced with additional chassis completed as ammunition carriers. Because the Hummel itself could not carry many rounds internally, and an armored artillery unit lives or dies by ammunition flow. About 700 Hummel vehicles were produced, and it is noted that specially designed ammunition transporters were also produced on the basis of this same vehicle. Tanks in Encyclopedia similarly emphasizes a total in the low 700s and highlights the parallel ammunition carrier program, and that ultimately is the Hummel's origin story in one sentence. It was Germany admitting, through steel and rivets, that modern armored war required artillery that could run with the tanks. Not chase them if the Hummel looks like a compromise. Low-hole open-topped, rear compartment gun shoved into a cramped fighting space. That is because it is a compromise. But it is the kind wartime Germany did well. Take proven parts, rearrange them with ruthless practicality, and accept vulnerability in exchange for mobility and firepower. Take proven parts, rearrange them with ruthless practicality, and accept vulnerability in exchange for mobility and firepower. The Hummel secret is not the howitzer, it is the carrier beneath it, the Geschosswagen 3-4, a purpose-built gun platform that borrows major components from the Panzer III and Panzer IV families to keep production and maintenance within familiar lines. In an industrial system already straining under multiple armored programs, that mattered as much as any battlefield feature. This vehicle is built on a hybrid chassis. The chassis was not simply a tank with a turret removed. Its internal architecture was reorganized around the artillery mission. The most important decision was moving the engine forward into the center of the hull so the rear could become a dedicated fighting compartment for the gun crew and ammunition handling. Tanks in Encyclopedia highlight this layout change as fundamental engine relocated to create room for the gun and the armored compartment at the back. That relocation shaped everything the crew experienced. The driver sat forward, with the transmission and steering gear still in the tank tradition, while the gun team lived and worked in a rear box that was armored on the sides and front but open to the sky. It was a workshop built onto a moving chassis, designed for the rhythm of artillery work. Load, fire, adjust, repeat, then move. Power came from the Maybach HL 120 TRM gasoline engine, commonly listed at around 300 horsepower. This was not an exotic power plant. It was familiar German medium tank territory, and that familiarity was part of the design philosophy. A Panzer division did not just need a self-propelled gun. It needed one that could be fed, repaired, and kept running by the same logistical bloodstream as the tanks it supported. On roads, sources commonly cite a maximum speed around 42 km per hour, with an operational range a little over 200 km under ideal conditions. Those numbers are less about racing and more about tempo. The Hummel could march with armored columns, reposition with battalion-level plans, and shift firing positions frequently enough to reduce exposure to counter battery fire if the unit had fuel and the roads or ground would allow it. Here is the bargain the Hummel makes with its crew. It will carry the heavy howitzer where it needs to go, but it will not protect you the way a tank does. Most summaries place armor thickness roughly in the range of 10 to 30 mm, depending on plate and location. That is enough to blunt shell splinters and small arms fire from certain angles, but it is not something you want to test against dedicated anti-tank weapons or even close-range heavy machine guns in the wrong circumstances. The open top is the most visible sign of that compromise. An open compartment reduces weight and complexity, gives the crew room to work a large gun, and makes ammunition handling possible without turning the interior into a steel coffin. But it also leaves the gun team exposed to shrapnel falling from above, mortar airburst, grenades, and the harsh truth of weather. In the engineering extreme of the Hummel, the extreme is psychological as much as mechanical. You are operating heavy artillery in a vehicle that admits openly that survivability comes from distance, concealment, and movement, not from armor. The Hummel's main armament was the 1.5 cm heavy field howitzer SFH 18/1, a self-propelled adaptation of Germany's standard heavy field howitzer family. The shell weight cited for the 15 cm heavy field howitzer SFH 18 is about 43.5 kilograms. A brutal mass designed to smash field fortifications and disrupt concentrations of troops and equipment. In range terms, the same weapon family is commonly cited at roughly 13,250 meters at maximum charge, though practical limits could be lower depending on charge use, wear, and firing conditions. That range and weight package explains why the Hummel existed at all. 10.5 cm self-propelled guns could provide volume and responsiveness, but a 15 cm shell is a different political argument to the battlefield. It collapses dugouts, shatters lock bunkers, and turns an anti-tank position into a cratered problem rather than a tactical puzzle. Inside the Hummel, the ammunition reality shaped tactics. Many summaries list an onboard capacity of about 18 rounds. That is not a sustained artillery mission. That is a short, violent contribution before the vehicle must be resupplied. The logistical answer was structural. Purpose-built ammunition carriers on the same chassis. Munitions trailer, Hummel, existed precisely because the gun vehicle could not carry enough shells to live independently at the front. One reference notes that 157 of these armored ammunition carriers were constructed, and then there is the loading method. The 15 cm high explosive ammunition was handled in two parts, projectile and charge, which slowed the cycle compared to smaller unitary rounds, but was normal for heavy howitzer practice tanks. In Encyclopedia notes the two-part nature of the Hummel's high explosive ammunition and the variable charge system. The result, a weapon that demanded a disciplined crew and an organized ammunition flow, less tank crew and more gun detachment, even though they rode on tracks. Prototype and early concept sometimes show a large muzzle brake, but production vehicles are widely noted as lacking it. An example of Germany trimming complexity or adapting to manufacturing realities under pressure. Tanks in Encyclopedia explicitly mentions the prototype's very large muzzle brake, and that it was not used on production models. Small changes like that tell you what mattered. Keep the gun effective. Keep the platform producible. Keep it in the field. The Hummel is artillery doctrine turned into machinery. Deliver heavy shells where the tanks are going. Then, survive by not being there when the enemy answers. On paper, the Hummel solved a very German problem. Panzer divisions moved faster than their heavy artillery could follow, so the artillery had to climb onto tracks and keep pace. In the field, the Hummel proved the idea was sound, but it also proved that mobile heavy artillery is a system. not a single vehicle. When the system worked, Humvees delivered crushing timely fire. When it did not, when fuel, ammunition, maintenance capacity, or simple breathing room ran out, the Humvee strengths could turn into liabilities. The first, and most important truth, it was never meant to fight like a tank. The Hummel was designed for indirect fire support and bombardment, not for trading shots at close range. Tanks Encyclopedia is blunt about this. Yes, a 150mm high explosive shell could wreck a tank with a direct hit, but using the vehicle in that role would be an emergency measure, not normal tactics. The vehicle's armor and open fighting compartment made that distinction more than doctrinal. It was survival. This shaped how crews used terrain. A Hummel battery lived by concealment. Reverse slopes, tree lines, village edges, folds in the ground. They wanted distance and time to register targets, and enough mobility to shoot and scoot before enemy counter-battery fire began. Walking in open-top compartment, while excellent for crew workflow, was a constant reminder that overhead protection did not exist. Shell fragments, mortar bursts, and strafing aircraft were not abstract threats. They were the weather of the Eastern Front and Normandy. The Hummel carried limited ammunition internally, commonly sighted at roughly 18 rounds, and heavy howitzer work burns through shells faster than most people imagine. The weapon's ammunition was also handled in two parts, projectile and variable charge, which is normal for a heavy field howitzer, but adds handling time, space demands, and fatigue. This is where the system reality bite. The Hummel needed a supply tail that could keep up with the gun line. The answer was the dedicated ammunition carrier variant, built on the same chassis. The Hummel was created precisely because the gun vehicle could not sustain a mission on its own stowage. In practice, a Hummel battery's effectiveness was often less about how well the guns shot, and more about whether ammunition carriers, trucks, and routes could keep feeding those guns under pressure. When that chain held, the Hummel's impact could be immediate. Quick displacement with the armored spearhead, rapid deployment, heavy shells on call. When it broke, mud-destroyed bridges, air attack, fuel shortages, the battery risked becoming an expensive set of empty guns. Mechanically, the Hummel benefited from being built around familiar German medium vehicle components and an established chassis family. That mattered because breakdowns were not rare exceptions. In 1943 to 1945, they were routine friction. The Hummel's design used a hybrid carrier derived from Panzer III and Panzer IV component lines, and it entered service in early 1943, immediately being pushed into frontline conditions. But even familiar does not mean easy. The Hummel carried a heavy weapon and its mounting structure, and it did so in a vehicle never as roomy as it looks from the outside. The fighting compartment was a working platform for a large crew operating a large gun, lifting, ramming, stacking charges, managing fuses, communicating fire orders, and then doing it again and again. Fatigue became a form of mechanical wear. Dropped shells damaged fittings, mishandled ammunition crates, and mistakes made when hands are numb from cold or slick with sweat. And because it was open top, crews and machinery were exposed to the environment in a way tank crews were not. Dust, rain, and snow entered the workspace freely. In Eastern Front mud season, every tracked vehicle suffered. The Hummel was no exception, and its job demanded frequent movement between firing positions and heights. Frequent movement meant frequent maintenance, and frequent maintenance demanded time. Time that late war German units often could not afford. In German armored artillery organization, Hummels were typically paired with lighter self-propelled howitzers such as the Vespa, creating a layered battery, where lighter guns handled some missions and the heavier guns delivered decisive blows. That pairing improved tactical reliability. Commanders could conserve Hummel ammunition for the targets that truly demanded a 150mm shell. Strong points, crossroads, assembly areas, and counter-attacks forming behind cover. But the Hummel's vulnerabilities punished tactical error. Bring it too far forward, and it could be pinned, flanked, or shredded by weapons it could not safely duel. Keep it too far back, and it lost the very responsiveness it was designed to provide. Its success depended on disciplined fire control, reconnaissance, and communications, because the vehicle itself was only the final link in the chain. When historians call the Hummel effective, they often mean a very specific kind of effectiveness. Not glory, but dependable violence delivered on time. It was a platform that made German heavy artillery present at the moment Panzer divisions needed it most. For the crew, that effectiveness came with a price. Open-top artillery work demanded nerve, routine, and constant movement. The Hummel did not let its crew forget that they were artillerymen riding a thinly protected compromise. Their protection was spacing, camouflage, and speed, and when those failed, the battlefield collected its dead quickly. The Hummel's battlefield story is not a single legendary duel or a famous last stand. It is something more revealing, and for German panzer divisions, more valuable. A steady pattern of heavy shells arriving when armored commanders needed them most. From the moment it entered service in early 1943, the Hummel became the deep voice in the Panzer artillery choir. Fewer guns than the lighter Wispy, fewer rounds on board than any artilleryman would prefer, but a 150mm punch that could break a stubborn position or smother a forming counterattack before it matured. Kursk, July 1943, baptism by mass battle. The Hummel's first large-scale test came at the Battle of Kursk in July 1943. Contemporary summaries consistently describe roughly 100 Hummels present in armored artillery battalions of panzer divisions during the operation. An early but meaningful concentration for a new system that matters because Kursk was not a normal offensive. German armor was trying to punch through layered Soviet defenses built around minefields, anti-tank guns, dug-in infantry, and artillery zones designed to bleed momentum. In that environment, heavy howitzer fire is not decorative. It is mechanical. It breaks wire, collapses fieldworks, smashes strong points, and suppresses the anti-tank crews, whose calm aim can stop an armored truss cold. A vivid snapshot of this use survives in the form of photo caption evidence. A Hummel of the 1st Battalion, Panzer Artillery Regiment 74, photographed firing at Soviet positions north of Ponyri during the Kursk fighting. Ponyri itself, a rail station, village, and symbolic hinge on the northern face, became one of the fiercest points of the battle. It became one of the fiercest points of the battle. The Hummel's job there was not to be seen. It was to make space for German movement by turning Soviet positions into a churned landscape of blast and shock. Operationally, Hummels at Kursk tended to be organized in dedicated heavy self-propelled batteries. Combat history reviews describe batteries built around 6 Hummel helicopters and supported by a dedicated ammunition transporter. That detail is easy to skim past, but it explains everything about how they fought. A Hummel battery was intended to move, fire a short, heavy mission, and then displace, fire a short, heavy mission, and then displace. Because it could not stay in one place long enough to trade artillery fire like a static gun line 1,944 inches to the west, Normandy's hedgerows, and the tyranny of air power. By June 1944, German armored divisions in France faced a different kind of battlefield. In the east, space was vast and concealment could be found in depth. In Normandy, the bocage compressed movement into lanes and hedgerow compartments. Movement into lanes and hedgerow compartments, deadly to tanks and complicated even for artillery. The Hummel's mobility still mattered, but now it had to function under relentless Allied air observation and interdiction. One practical way to understand human operations in Normandy is to look at the structure German units tried to maintain. A compiled divisional summary for 2nd Panzer Division in Normandy describes a self-propelled artillery complement of 12 Vesper and 6 Hummel within the artillery regiment, exactly the kind of light plus heavy pairing German doctrine favored for responsive fire support. For the men serving the gun, Normandy was often a sequence of hurried marches, hasty positions, and constant displacement. A biographical archive entry for a 2nd Panzer Division officer, Johann Hohenegger, describes him arriving in early August 1944 to command the division's Hummel battery, right as German forces were reeling from the collapse around Operation Cobra and the battles along the VR area. Whether you follow the individual story or the unit-level narrative, the same operational rhythm emerges. The Hummel battery is pushed into the line to provide immediate heavy fire, then pull back, then push again because the front is not stable. And artillery that cannot move becomes artillery that dies. By August, the retreat across France turned Hummels into both assets and burdens. They were valuable because they could still deliver heavy shells in rearguard actions. They were burdened because fuel scarcity and Allied interdiction made movement itself a gamble. A specific battlefield artifact, often cited in post-war vehicle histories, is a surviving Hummel, said to have been knocked out by tanks of the United States 5th Armored Division, on the 10th of August 1944, in France. Even if you treat that as a case study rather than a universal pattern, it illustrates a consistent danger. Once a Hummel is forced into proximity, caught on roads, trapped in compartmented terrain, or pulled forward into direct fire emergencies, it becomes extremely vulnerable. Ardennes, December 1944. Heavy guns played a role in the last great gamble of the 1944 winter offensive, Operation Wacht am Rhein. The Hummel's role returned to something closer to its original purpose, supporting a fast-moving, armored thrust with mobile heavy artillery. But now, the operational context was desperate. German divisions were under strength, fuel was the true limiting factor, and every kilometer gain had to be justified against a strategic clock. Divisional compilations used by military historians and enthusiasts frequently list Hummels within Panzer divisions committed to the offensive. For example, one summary for 2nd Panzer Division's Ardennes organization lists a self-propelled artillery battalion of Panzer Artillery Regiment 74 with a mix of Wespe and Hummel. Another compilation for 9th Panzer Division notes that, in that offensive period, the division fielded 9 Hummel self-propelled heavy howitzers, even while lacking some lighter self-propelled pieces. Those numbers are not just order of battle trivia. They translate directly into operational behavior. A handful of Hummels can provide concentrated fire for a crossing, a village assault, or a defensive screen. While armor refuels and reorganizes, they cannot sustain a broad artillery campaign, especially not with limited onboard ammunition and a supply chain strangled by fuel shortages and allied air power whenever the weather cleared. The Ardennes also highlights one of the Hummel's most important operational characteristics. It helped Panzer divisions generate self-contained fire support without waiting for corps-level artillery. When German armored spearheads tried to force road junctions, bridges, and defended towns, the Hummel could be in place rapidly, fire heavy missions, and then relocate with the spearhead, at least until fuel scarcity, traffic jams, and enemy pressure turned roads into bottlenecks. From 1943 through 1945, the Hummel remained valuable for one reason. It brought heavy artillery into the same mobility class as tanks and armored infantry. And armored infantry, it served from the beginning of 1943 until the end of the war. But by late 1944 and 1945, the operational returns narrowed. German division increasingly lacked the conditions Hummels needed to thrive. Fuel, trained crews, secure ammunition delivery, and enough freedom of movement to displace before counter-battery fire or fighter bombers arrived. And yet, the Hummel's operational record is still a kind of success story, because it was one of the few mid-war German armored solutions that matched the real doctrinal need and remained relevant across multiple theaters. It did not win wars. It did something more modest and more telling. It made German armored formations more complete, giving them the heavy fire they had been missing when the war stopped being a series of breakthroughs and became a series of fortified problems. The Hummel was not glamorous, and that is exactly why it mattered. Germany built it to solve a concrete operational problem. Panzer divisions were fast, but the heavy artillery was not. By marrying the proven 5 cm heavy field howitzer family to the hybrid Geschützwagen III-4 chassis, the Hummel created a mobile, heavy howitzer that could deploy quickly, deliver powerful fire, and relocate with armored formations, something towed batteries often could not do under Soviet counter-battery pressure or in the chaos of fast-moving fronts. Technologically, the Hummel's innovation was not a single breakthrough, but a disciplined set of compromises. Thin armor, an open-top compartment for gun operation, limited onboard ammunition, and dependence on dedicated resupply vehicles. Those compromises made it vulnerable in close combat and under airburst fragmentation, but they also made it producible and practical within Germany's strained industrial base and crucially usable by field units that already understood Panzer III and Panzer IV systems. Historically, the Hummel's legacy is doctrinal. It helps standardize the idea that armored formations needed their own artillery that could move at the same operational tempo, an idea every major army would embrace more fully after 1945. The Hummel did not change the outcome of the war, but it did change how German armored divisions could fight on a minute-to-minute basis. Heavy shells on call, delivered from a platform that could keep up with the advance or retreat. This is still doctrine. Legendary war machines. Real history. No myths. Write in the comments which tank you would like to hear about in the next episode. Like, subscribe, and uncover history forged in steel.